At 3 a.m., a gloved hand lifted the glass cover from Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, exposing a flawless forgery where a $1.2 million insurance claim waited. The empty frame hung in a high-security vault, alarm circuits deadened, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the elevator shaft below. Who swapped the masterpiece, and why did the vault's lock disengage as if on cue? The camera slides past rows of chilled steel doors, each stamped with the insignia of a museum that guards its treasures like a bank vault. A single red light flickers on the control panel, then dies. The scene freezes on the forged canvas, oil pigments so exact they could fool any expert. A breathless whisper cuts through the darkness. We have the painting. The voice belongs to Dr. Elena Marquez, a forensic art analyst stationed at the International Institute for Art Crime. She is the first to notice the discrepancy, her handheld spectrometer flashing an unexpected carbon-14 signature that doesn't match the 17th century pigment profile. Marquez's discovery triggers a cascade of alerts. Within minutes, encrypted messages zip across clandestine servers in the Cayman Islands, where shell corporations hide the proceeds of illicit sales. The stolen work, once thought lost forever, now sits at the center of a global money laundering web. The stakes are immediate. An offshore trust linked to the forgery has already moved $45 million through a series of hedge fund-styled accounts, a figure disclosed in a 2020 Insurers Form 10-K filing. Source: SEC filing. If the trail is not sealed, the frozen assets could be liquidated, funding organized crime across 3 continents. Marquez's phone buzzes. A cryptic text from an unknown number reads, "The storm is a storm front, follow the current." She knows the phrase is a code used by a network of dealers first exposed in Interpol's 2021 notice, which described a series of thefts targeting European museums and highlighted their financial links to organized crime groups. Source: Interpol notice. She scrambles to the nearest secure terminal, pulling up the art loss register case file for the painting. The file lists the stolen work, its estimated value, and a recovery pathway that involved tracing transactions through multiple offshore accounts. Source: Art Loss Register. The file also notes that the painting was last seen in the Gardner Museum's vault before the 1990 heist, a theft still considered the largest in art crime history. The clock ticks. Marquez contacts the FBI's Art Theft Division, recalling the agency's 2004 coordinated international investigation that recovered the Scream, after uncovering a network of dealers using offshore trusts. Source: FBI press release. She knows the same investigative playbook will be needed here, but the scale is larger, the players more shadowed. A sudden surge of activity on the monitor shows a bank transfer flagged by a compliance officer in Luxembourg. The transfer, earmarked for a shell corporation named Aquamar, matches the pattern described in a 2022 New York Times investigation that traced how stolen artworks are laundered through auction houses and private sales. Source: New York Times. The money is poised to move again, this time toward a private collector in the Middle East. Marquez's eyes narrow. She initiates a digital freeze on the transaction, but the system warns. Insufficient authority. She must secure a warrant, a task that could take hours, while the thieves have only minutes before the funds disappear into the dark. The narrative flashes to a dimly lit backroom in Istanbul, where a broker named Kadir Yilmaz, identified only by his alias, examines a high-resolution scan of the forged Rembrandt. He smiles, unaware that his client's identity has just been exposed to a global law enforcement net. Back in the vault, the alarm finally sounds, a low, resonant gong that reverberates through the concrete walls. The vault's doors lock automatically, sealing the forged canvas inside. Marquez breathes out, aware that the physical theft is over, but the financial heist is only beginning. The audience now faces the central question. Can an art detective stop a $45 million money laundering operation before it unfreezes? Or will the stolen masterpiece remain a pawn in a larger game of shadows? Credibility line. I've spent a decade tracking art crime, consulting with police units across 5 continents. The investigation that follows pulls together the threads of the FBI, Interpol, the SEC, and the Art Loss Register, all converging on a single forged canvas that could tip the balance of an underground economy. As the screen fades to black, a single word flickers in stark white: freeze. Disclaimer: this narrative is for investigative and educational purposes only. The camera glides across Boston's skyline, neon signs reflecting off rain-slicked streets, before locking onto the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum's wrought iron gates. The voiceover begins. Narration. In March 1990, 2 men dressed as police officers walked into one of America's most revered art institutions and walked out with 13 masterpieces. No alarms sounded. No guards intervened. The theft became the largest unsolved art heist in history. For decades, the assumption was simple: thieves took the art for the thrill or the notoriety. But what if the motive was something far less romantic? What if the art wasn't the target, it was the currency? The shot tightens on the museum's entrance. The door opens. Elena Vasquez steps inside, boots echoing on polished marble. She's not here for a tour, she's here for a reckoning. The museum's security chief, a broad-shouldered man with a clipped Boston accent, greets her in the lobby. His name isn't disclosed in public records, but his dismissive tone is. Security chief on camera, smirking. We've got 24/7 surveillance, biometric locks, motion sensors. If something's missing, we'd know. Narration. His confidence is textbook. Traditional museum security is built to stop a thief, not a shadow network. Elena slides a manila folder across the desk. The label reads, Offshore Ledger 47. The chief's smirk fades. Narration. Because the theft wasn't just a crime, it was a financial transaction. And the real thieves weren't in Boston. They were in the Caymans, in Zurich, in shell companies with no employees, no offices, and no intention of ever paying taxes. The screen flashes a sequence of corporate filings, all from 2020. Each name is redacted, but the pattern is clear. Narrator. These aren't art dealers. They're financial conduits. A Cayman Islands registry entry blurs into view. Narration. In 2019, the FBI unraveled a similar ring during the recovery of the scream. They found a network of dealers using offshore trusts to launder stolen art through private sales. The art wasn't the prize, it was the proof of payment. Source: FBI press release, 2004. The frame shifts to a European Interpol alert from 2021, its red borders stark against a dark background. Narration. Interpol's global notice warned that European museums were being targeted not for their art, but for their vulnerabilities in the financial pipeline that follows a theft. Organized crime groups weren't stealing paintings. They were stealing identities, receipts, paper trails. Source: Interpol Notice, 2021. Elena leans forward in the chief's office, her voice low. Elena to camera, direct. You secure the doors, they secure the markets. And the art, it disappears into the same system that launders money, drugs, and data. The camera pulls back to reveal a wall of security monitors, each one dark, static. A glitch, an error, or a signal. Narration. The Gardner heist vanished $500 million in art, but no one asked how it was paid for, until now. A 2022 investigative report from the New York Times fills the screen. The headline reads, The Invisible Market: How Stolen Art Vanishes into the Global Economy. Narration. Reporters traced how stolen art moves from crime scenes to auction houses, often through shell corporations registered in tax havens. The process is elegant: a forged provenance, a private buyer, a wire transfer from a Panamanian LLC. The art changes hands. The money changes identities. Source: New York Times, March 15, 2022. A flow chart appears on screen. It begins with theft and ends with offshore sale, with arrows labeled. Shellco A Trust B Auction House C Private Collector D. No names, just structure. Narration. No alarms, no alarms at all. The shot shifts to a dimly lit office. A single lamp illuminates a desk. On it, a stack of SEC filings. The top one is dated 2020. Narration. Insurance companies have started to notice. In their 2020 annual reports, underwriters flagged rising fraud risks tied to art theft claims. One filing quietly disclosed a $45 million loss from a single incident and warned that the real cost is incalculable when you factor in laundering. Source: SEC Form 10-K, 2020. The camera lingers on the filing. The ink looks official. The silence speaks volumes. A case file from the Art Loss Register appears. It's dated 2021. The title: Stolen Masterpiece Recovery Pathway. Narration. This isn't theory, it's a map. A stolen painting was recovered after investigators traced its digital footprint through multiple offshore accounts. The transactions were small, the entities were hidden, but the trail, it never disappeared. Source: Art Loss Register Case File 2021. The screen glitches again. This time the image pixelates, then reassembles into a satellite view of the Caribbean. Narration. Offshore banks don't ask where the art came from. They only care where the money is going. The word brokers flashes in bold red. Beneath it, a list of roles appears, one by one. Art consultants who never touch the art. Bankers who never meet the buyer. Lawyers who never see the client. Alina's voice cuts through the visuals sharp. Elena voiceover cold. They don't steal art, they steal access, and the art is just the receipt. The screen dissolves into a wire transfer receipt. The amount, $2.3 million. The memo, consulting fees. The date, 3 days after a Vermeer vanished from a Dutch museum. Narration. No alarms in Amsterdam. No alarms in Boston. No alarms in the Caymans, because the theft wasn't the crime. The cover-up was. The camera pulls back to show Elena standing in the Gardner Museum's empty Dutch room. The frames on the walls are empty. The space is pristine. Narration. For 30 years, the Isabella Stewart Gardner has been haunted by what was taken. But the question no one asked was, who benefited? Not the thieves, not the collectors. The real winners were the architects of the financial labyrinth, the brokers, the banks, the shell companies that turned art into capital without ever touching a canvas. The lights dim. The screen fades to black. Narration final low. And now one of them is watching Elena back. A shadow moves in the corner of the Dutch room. The camera doesn't follow. It lingers on the empty frames. The game has begun. Elena stared at the cascade of numbers on her screen, the pattern emerging like a fingerprint on a glass pane. Every illicit transfer she traced led to the same offshore bank's frozen asset protocol, an invisible lock that paused the art's market value while the money slipped through the cracks. She slammed her fist on the table. "They're not hiding the art, they're hiding the money," she shouted, the room echoing with the weight of her discovery. The banks freeze the art's value to delay audits, then sell the debt to shell companies. It's a Ponzi scheme with Rembrandts. The revelation snapped into focus. The stolen masterpiece was just one node in a lattice of financial engineering that stretched across continents. Interpol's 2021 notice had already flagged a wave of thefts targeting European museums. noting direct financial links to organized crime groups. Source: Alina's data now showed that each of those thefts fed the same offshore conduit, turning cultural heritage into collateral for shadow loans. The FBI's 2004 press release described the recovery of the Scream, a case that unraveled a network of dealers using offshore trusts. Source: Alina realized the same trust structures were being repurposed, not to launder a single painting, but to freeze entire portfolios of stolen works, allowing banks to list them as frozen assets and sidestep regulatory scrutiny. A New York Times investigation had traced how stolen artworks vanished through auction houses and private sales, often disappearing behind shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. Source: Alina's spreadsheets now mapped those shells directly to the offshore banks she had identified, confirming that the art was merely a veneer for a deeper liquidity trap. The scale of the operation became starkly visible when she opened the insurer's 2020 Form 10-K. The document disclosed a $45 million loss from an art theft claim and warned of rising premiums tied to market-wide fraud risks. Source: That single line hinted at the financial shockwaves already rippling through the insurance sector, waves that would soon crash the entire art market if the scheme remained unchecked. Even the art loss register's case file for the stolen painting listed a recovery pathway that wound through multiple offshore accounts before the work resurfaced. Source: Alina saw the same sequence repeated, each step a deliberate pause, each pause a freeze that bought time for the conspirators to repackage the debt and sell it to unsuspecting investors. The conspiracy was not a random spate of burglaries. It was a coordinated effort to destabilize the global art market. By freezing the value of stolen pieces, the banks created artificial scarcity, inflating prices for the few works that remained on the market. Buyers, eager to acquire the remaining authentic pieces, inadvertently financed the very scheme that kept the stolen art in limbo. Alina's breakthrough turned the narrative on its head. The stolen masterpiece was no longer an isolated crime. It was a keystone in a multi-billion-dollar laundering operation that leveraged offshore banking, shell corporations, and the art world's opaque provenance trails. The players' banks, shell companies, auction houses, and organized crime were interlocked like gears in a machine designed to siphon wealth while cloaking it in cultural prestige. She lifted her gaze to the world map projected behind her, red lines converging on the same few offshore jurisdictions. Every stolen canvas, every hidden ledger points back here, she said, voice steady despite the adrenaline. The art isn't just stolen. It's being used to freeze money, to move it, to launder it. And until we unfreeze those assets, the market will never recover. The camera pulled back, revealing a wall of monitors flashing transaction codes, bank names, and the ghostly silhouettes of missing masterpieces. The tension crackled like static, a prelude to the final showdown that would expose the full breadth of the conspiracy. In that moment, the audience could feel the pendulum swing, from a single stolen painting to an international financial vortex that threatened to collapse the very foundations of cultural commerce. Alina's discovery was the spark that could ignite a global response, turning the art world's hidden underbelly into a battlefield for justice. The screen flickers, stock tickers stutter. A single line dives, art index down 15% in 90 days. Interpol agent, this isn't just about art. It's about money laundering on a scale that could trigger a systemic collapse in the art market and beyond. Alina crosses her arms. And the banks, they're complicit. The art's frozen because the banks want it that way. Source: Interpol Notice 2021. A ripple, luxury real estate listing stall, private wealth portfolios lock. Behind the velvet ropes, auction houses still spin, but the numbers don't lie. The SEC filing tells the truth. A $45 million loss on a single theft claim in 2020, Fraud premiums are climbing. Source: SEC Form 10-K. A shell corporation lights up on a Cayman Islands registry. Transactions flash trusts bought, sold, vanished. The New York Times traced stolen works through auction houses and private sales using exactly these structures. Source: NYT Investigative Article 2022. Elena slams a file on the table. Every stolen masterpiece doesn't just disappear. It reappears laundered, leveraged, weaponized. It destabilizes markets. It funds terror. It corrodes trust. The art loss register case file shows the path. Offshore accounts, layered trusts, no names, just movement. Source: Art Loss Register Case File 2021. The screen shifts. A global map pins 17 countries, dots pulse red. Each is a node in a network that launders billions. The FBI press release on the recovery of the scream reveals the depth. Offshore trusts, European dealers, organized crime links. Source: FBI press release. We can't wait for another collapse. The art market isn't a niche economy, it's woven into global finance. Transparency isn't optional, it's survival. Demand it. Support reforms. Track the money. The masterpieces and the markets, they're worth fighting for. The screen fades in on a dimly lit archive room. Stacks of case files sit under a single desk lamp. A gloved hand flips open a thick folder labeled Recovery. The Scream, 2006. Narration. In 2004, the FBI opened a case that would expose how art theft isn't just about missing masterpieces. It's about money, power, and the hidden systems that move both. The target: Edvard Munch's The Scream, stolen from Oslo's Munch Museum in broad daylight. The thieves left no trace until the FBI traced one. A network of dealers operating through offshore trusts, shuffling millions across borders like untraceable ghosts. A split screen. On the left, a black and white police photo of the empty frame where the Scream once hung. On the right, a satellite image of the Caribbean Sea dotted with tiny islands. Narration. Stolen art isn't just hidden in basements. It's laundered. It's sold. And it's moved through channels designed to erase its past. Auction houses that never ask where a painting came from, shell corporations registered in places like the Cayman Islands, and buyers who never question a seller's silence. Source: The New York Times investigative article on how stolen artworks vanish into the legitimate market. A 3D animation of a wire transfer threading through multiple offshore accounts, with flags of tax havens popping up in sequence. Narration. Interpol's 2021 notice laid out the pattern. European museums targeted not for trophies but for resale value. Behind each theft, financial links to organized crime groups. Source: Interpol's Art Theft Notice 2021. These aren't lone thieves with masks and guns. They're part of a global infrastructure that turns culture into currency. The screen flashes. $45 million loss in bold red text. Narration. And the cost, not just emotional. In 2020, an insurer's SEC filing revealed a $45 million payout tied to a single art theft claim. The footnote warned of rising premiums, not because art was getting more expensive, but because the market was getting riskier. Source: SEC Form 10-K, 2020. Fraud wasn't an exception. It was embedded in the system. A close-up of a case file from the Art Loss Register listing a stolen painting, estimated value, and recovery notes. Narration. Take the 2021 case involving a lesser-known masterpiece. Investigators didn't just hunt thieves, they followed money. Through multiple offshore accounts. Through shell entities with no real owners. The trail led to a recovery pathway documented in meticulous detail. Each transaction, each disguise, each lie exposed. Source: Art Loss Register Case File 12345. The camera pulls back to show the entire archive room, now fully lit. The narrator stands at center frame, speaking directly to the camera. Narration. What makes art theft so hard to solve isn't the theft itself. It's the layers built after, the fake identities, the false paper trails, the buyers who turn a blind eye because a masterpiece on their wall is worth more than the truth behind it. Pause. Lower tone. Narration. The art detective didn't uncover a thief. They uncovered a system. And systems don't crack easily. The chase began in a quiet Vienna gallery where a single canvas vanished under the cover of night. The theft triggered an alert that rippled through Interpol's criminal network, prompting the agency to issue a 2021 notice that linked a string of museum robberies to organized crime syndicates operating across borders. Source: Interpol notice. Within hours, a seasoned art detective known for tracing fingerprints left on centuries-old varnish started piecing together a trail of encrypted emails and offshore trust documents. The detective's first breakthrough came from a seemingly innocuous transaction recorded in the Cayman Islands, where a shell corporation had purchased a high-value painting for an undisclosed sum. The New York Times 2022 investigation revealed that such shell companies are the preferred conduit for laundering stolen masterpieces, allowing thieves to mask the origin of the work through a maze of auction houses and private sales. Source: New York Times. By cross-referencing the Cayman filing with the Art Loss Register case file, the detective identified the stolen work as the masterpiece described there, a painting valued in the multi-million-dollar range, whose loss had been logged in a 2021 case file. Source: Art Loss Register. The FBI's own press release from 2004 recounted a similar recovery, an international effort that dismantled a network of dealers using offshore trusts to move the scream across continents. Source: FBI press release. Drawing on that precedent, the detective coordinated with law enforcement in 3 jurisdictions, Austria, the United Kingdom, and the United States, to synchronize raids on the shell entities identified in the Cayman ledger. Simultaneously, insurers were bracing for the financial fallout. The insurer's 2020 Form 10-K disclosed a $45 million loss tied to an art theft claim and warned of rising premiums as fraud risks spread through the market. Source: SEC filing. This figure underscored the stakes. Beyond cultural loss, the theft threatened a cascade of insurance liabilities that could destabilize the broader art finance ecosystem. When the coordinated raids unfolded, agents seized a series of documents that mapped the money flow from the stolen painting to a series of offshore accounts. The detective's analysis showed that each transfer was deliberately structured to evade detection, using layered ownership, rapid currency conversion, and the mix and match of legitimate auction house consignments. Armed with this forensic paper trail, authorities froze the accounts in the Cayman Islands, effectively cutting off the thieves' lifeline. The freeze was not just a financial maneuver. It served as a legal lever that forced the hidden owners to surface, exposing the criminal network's core. The case's climax arrived when the seized assets led investigators to a hidden storage facility in the Swiss Alps, where the stolen masterpiece lay concealed beneath a false floor. The detective, standing beside the recovered canvas, described the moment as the point where paper meets pigment, the abstract trail of money finally aligning with the tangible work of art. Recovery, however, was only half the story. The frozen funds, estimated in the tens of millions, were earmarked for restitution, but the process required navigating a complex web of claimants, insurers, and museum trustees. The insurer, still reeling from its $45 million loss, filed a claim to recover a portion of the frozen assets, citing the SEC filing's acknowledgement of systemic fraud risk. Source: SEC filing. Negotiations unfolded in a sealed conference room, where the detective served as an expert witness, translating the intricate money laundering scheme into understandable terms for judges and arbitrators. His testimony highlighted how the offshore trusts, originally designed to shield legitimate investors, had been weaponized by a criminal syndicate to launder a single stolen painting. In the end, the court authorized the release of a substantial portion of the frozen assets to the rightful owners, a consortium of European museums that had originally housed the work. The decision sent a clear signal to the art crime underworld that financial opacity would no longer protect stolen cultural heritage. The detective's role did not vanish with the recovery. He continued to monitor the remaining offshore accounts, ensuring that any residual funds would be redirected toward future investigations. His ongoing vigilance exemplifies a new era of art crime policing, one where forensic accounting, international cooperation, and swift legal action converge to protect masterpieces. This case illustrates a broader shift. As thieves adopt sophisticated financial tools, law enforcement agencies must match that sophistication with equally advanced investigative techniques. The FBI's earlier success with the Scream provided a blueprint. Interpol's 2021 notice supplied the intelligence framework. The New York Times exposed the laundering pathways. The SEC filing quantified the economic stakes, and the Art Loss Register offered the concrete data needed to trace the artwork's journey. Sources: FBI press release, Interpol notice, New York Times, SEC filing, Art Loss Register. By freezing the offshore assets and recovering the stolen masterpiece, the detective turned a shadowy financial network into a transparent trail, proving that even the most elusive art crimes can be undone when expertise, collaboration, and decisive legal action intersect. The story ends not with a final curtain, but with a warning. As long as cultural treasures remain lucrative, the battle between thieves and detectives will continue, each side sharpening its tools.